All right, welcome back to the Tectonic Takes podcast. It's Abram and Ivan with you here today after a fun-filled week of soccer action in the Bay Area. Some highs, some lows. We'll go through it all. We'll focus, of course, on the California Clasico with the San Jose Earthquakes versus LA Galaxy showdown at Stanford Stadium. Abram, how was your weekend?
My weekend was it started off okay. I mean, I would have loved to have gotten a win at Stanford. So that started off, kind of rocky. But other than that, it's been good. I had a good Fourth of July. How about you?
Yeah, I had a good 4th of July. I hope all you listeners enjoyed your 4th of July as well, did so responsibly. I'm sure you probably are aware of some of the incidents that occurred in 4th of July across the country, and we hope that everyone is safe and doing okay. But ultimately, as far as people I know personally, my family, friends, and hopefully all you all listening had a safe and fun 4th of July. And one of the activities this weekend, of course, was the California Clasico, which was an entertaining game, a 2-2 draw, which does extend the winless run to 4 games since the win at home against Philadelphia Union, which is starting to look like a false dawn. Uh, Things have been a little bit tough. 2 draws, both at home against Portland and Galaxy. Our first loss at home of the season against St. Louis, and of course that dreadful 4-1 loss in treacherous weather conditions in Houston. All that means Quakes are currently sixth in the Western Conference, 28 points out of 21 games, and it's 7 wins, 7 draws, 7 losses. So Thanos is very pleased with that. Perfectly balanced as all things should be, apparently. We're 7 points off top with St. Louis currently leading the Western Conference, and of course they have a game in hand. 2 points above Austin in eighth, which is the MLS play-in spot. They have a game in hand. 4 points above Sporting Kansas City in 10th, which would be out of the playoffs, but fortunately SKC have played an extra game. But all this means is that the margin for error is pretty much gone for the San Jose Earthquakes. They have to start picking up points in every game possible. Otherwise, they or any other team caught in the mix in the Western Conference could slip out of the playoff picture. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you right now at this point in the season, Abram?
1 to 10, I would give it. I think we're approaching a 7, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that we could stay at like a 6, 6.5, because there, yeah, like you said, there's no more margin for error. We can't keep losing points. We were in fourth, fifth, and we've been in this spot for a while, but we've been like coasting off of other people's bad results, and so if we can prove to everyone that we deserve to be up here in the upper half of the table, then I think that would be awesome. But unfortunately, right now, it doesn't look like we're headed toward that unless we turn it
Right.
around.
I haven't seen the latest MLS power rankings, but if I were to see the Earthquakes anywhere from 10 to 17, that wouldn't surprise me. Anywhere in that range, depending on how the other teams are doing. Uh, Still haven't processed all that because there was the double game week that occurred last night. We're recording the Wednesday after the Tuesday. We'll, of course, mention the Trafico as well later in this podcast. So with those teams in action, most of the league not in action, still tough to gauge exactly who the teams in form are, especially now that we got a couple games left before we get into the League's Cup break, which can be an indicator of which teams are going to have MLS Cup success this season, or it could just be another facade and another variable thrown into this complicated equation. So basically, all we know now is that San Jose Earthquakes are starting to lose control of their own destiny. They're still in a playoff spot, but you never want to go to LAFC and also host Seattle Sounders looking for points. We're hoping for, or at least I am, a minimum of 2 points. So at least getting a draw from both games. But the fans don't want that. Too many draws can be causing apathy within the fan base, and ideally 4 out of 6. and that's still a big ask. So realistically, that would require we get a draw against LAFC in Los Angeles, and then we beat the Sounders at home, which would feel good, but still a very tough task. How are you feeling ahead of those two games, Abram, before we get into the Galaxy game recap?
I mean, it's scary. Sounders are never a team that you want to sleep on. We did manage to beat them at home, at their home earlier this season, but there's no guarantee we can replicate that or even like tie. Like they're a team that can easily beat us. If they're on, if they're having a good if they're having a good game, and it's going to be up to us Quakes fans to show up in full support and make
Mm-hmm.
it hard for them to play at PayPal Park.
And to be perfectly honest, that's not a win at Lumen Field that we can go and like, okay, that was so decisive, so dominant. We can just repeat that at PayPal Park. It was very, bend, don't break, hold on for dear life type of win, which is still valid. That's the same amount of points you get as you would beating someone 7-0. But it does mean that we can't just expect a win. Frankly, even in the best of times in MLS, you can't expect a win against anybody. But right now, wins are hard to come by, so it's tough to look at a team and pencil them in as like, okay, this is a team that the Quakes are certain to win, especially with the near future packed full of strong opponents. And frankly, I'm not thinking beyond the next four games, two in MLS and then the Leagues Cup, which we'll also talk about today. As for this game in Stanford. The most positive thing, though, despite again falling short of the win, is the fight back and recapturing that spark. It was important that we scored more than one goal. I felt like the goals were drying up a little bit. It was also nice to see Christian Espinoza get a goal as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the first half, though. Abram, what were some of your highlights and thoughts of the first half?
Um, Unfortunately, the only highlight I have would be who scored the first one? Scan.
Yeah, Skane.
Scan's
Mhm.
goal. I thought that uh, Espinosa. Okay, first of all, that ball from Rodriguez to put it over
Mhm.
the top to Espinosa on the right was beautiful. That was like a David Beckham esque pass, but with
Yeah.
his weak foot. We were very lucky to have Rodriguez. However, I did think it was a little bit irresponsible of Espinosa to go for the nutmeg there, and it with way too much power, and gave it to the opposition. We got lucky that Acapa was so on, and he managed to recover that ball, and then he basically blasted it into the box, and I give Acapa all the credit on that goal, even though Skayan was the one who ultimately put it in, because Acapa basically bounced it off of Skayan to score. You know what I mean? Um, and all props to Scan for being in the right place. But other than that, I there's not much you could say positive for the attack in the first half. I thought that the goal that we let in was very weak. It was I almost want to say like we weren't looking, um,
Yeah.
and we almost conceded a very similar one. A similar goal to that after, if you remember, Douglas Costa got another corner kick on the same side, and it almost went in again. And so like I don't know what we have to do. I don't know if like we have to cover, tighter. But again, that's not for me to decide. That's for the coaching staff to figure out. And it's for me to criticize, which is why I'm here with my microphone. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's not a lot of positive in the first half, unfortunately. But at least we didn't go into the first half losing. I don't believe.
Yeah, we entered the half tied 1-1. Do you remember who scored the goal for the Galaxy? Because
Yeah,
I have the answer for this, and then I'll
I
explain my
do.
thoughts. Yeah, who was that?
Raheem Edwards, the
Hmm.
ex LAFC left back. I he's a mixed player. He has good performances. He has bad performances. He's a little clumsy sometimes, but I mean, can't take that goal away from him. He was in the right spot.
Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is because he was a very controversial performer in El Tráfico, where he was very lucky not to get sent off in that game. And
Mm,
because he dodged a yellow card and then Greg Vanney substituted him off for Julian Aude, they were able to go in and win that game. Just kind of, good for you, Galaxy. You didn't beat us, but you beat LAFC. You did our dirty work for us in a little bit and showed us a valuable game plan to implement against LAFC. And of course, we beat LAFC once earlier this season, but we also lost to them more recently than that. So that's valuable information to take in. So the reason I bring that up is because the more I watched him perform against LAFC, I was thinking to myself, how did we let this guy of all guys score against us? With all due respect, any player on any given day can score a goal. But it just felt like that was an unnecessary roadblock to put in front of ourselves that could have resulted in a defeat, and could have, if that didn't happen, we could have won that game. But unfortunately, it just gave the Earthquakes a mountain to climb. And the theme for the first half for me was some positive moments. I know Miguel Trauco had a really good run in that first half, but positive moments with nothing to show for it is becoming an increasingly worrisome trend for the San Jose Earthquakes. But then, as we would eventually score at least 2 goals in that game, and for me, scoring 2 goals a game is like a bare minimum to be a very competitive team. Unless your defense is airtight, you're not going to win a lot of games and move high up the table winning 1-0. You know, that's why in the last Gold Cup in 2021, when USA was beating most teams 1-0, it was very unconvincing. It didn't really boost the stock for many of those players to be considered for the World Cup roster the following year. But ultimately, the most important thing right now is just finding a win by any means necessary. And right now, a big roadblock for that has been just not doing enough on the defensive end when the opportunity scores to make it harder for the offense to generate those goals as well. And it was 2 minutes into the second half when Galaxy scored, and when I saw Preston Judge start, I didn't breathe a sigh of relief. I knew that this was the Galaxy's plan. Preston Judd was at worst going to be a minutes eater because they needed that body to start, but he also would be, his game is more effective as starting for the LA Galaxy system, and Dejan Joveljic is more effective coming off the bench. So even without Javier Hernandez, they are still very effective in the striker department, and that was something that we had to be wary of. What did you think of that 2-1 lead goal by the Galaxy?
Uh, from a fan perspective, I thought it was another lapse of focus, and that is a phrase that we've uttered many times over the past 2, 3 years of following the earthquakes. A lapse of focus, and they allowed the Galaxy to run or march straight through the middle of the field. They found Preston Judd in between the two defenders, I believe, and then he was allowed to take a shot off on goal. I think that if we were set up properly and more ready for them to attack us, we could have stopped that easily. I think that we have the quality, and we've stopped harder chances than that in the past. But unfortunately, the 2 goals that Galaxy scored were both goals that I felt were soft and really exposed our weaknesses in terms of our mental fortitude in defense. I think that earlier this season we were super solid, and maybe they think that they take that for granted in a way where they're like, we're not going to concede, but then because of that mentality we do concede. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And another player that I feel like he's been asked of a lot more lately, and maybe that's weighing on him in some of his performances, has been Nico Shakiris. He had a really unfortunate miss that, frankly, it had to be a goal there in the 54th, 55th minute. And it was a tough task for him because he was starting in a big game because Jamir Montero wasn't fit for that game, which was a parallel to the previous Stanford
Mm.
game, as you pointed out when we were at the game. And I think that he's going to be fine. Obviously, especially as San Jose Earthquakes fans, we've been preaching since the 2014 World Cup not to let one bad miss define a player's career, and especially not when that player is 17 years old, like Shakiris is. So We're not going to hold it against him too much. It's unfortunate. We'll move on from that, and hopefully he can learn from that. He got a good 65 minutes in that game, but I think him just getting more confidence, either starting or coming off the bench, he has the skills and attributes to be a game changer for a bench unit that's lacking a lot of game changers. And as well as Jack Skane gaining more confidence in that winger role, which helped because he did score a goal. I think those are going to be two important factors going forward, right, Abram?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that I'm glad that Nico. It doesn't seem like there's too much, negative energy thrown his way so far. I think because he's like one of our star kids. I think that that obviously changes when you get older. Tommy Thompson is a player that's been getting a lot of stick, in my opinion. And that chance that Nico Shikara's got was not an easy chance by any means. Obviously, he could have done better, but you know, it wasn't easy. He had no time. He had to turn and then shoot and then get it on target and beat the keeper. All in one swift movement. Um, but no, he's an important player. I think that he provides something different than Montero. Um, just like in the way that he kind of flows, and he's like a metronome higher up the field, and like he brings everyone into the attack, and he's like a more inclusive uh,
Attacking midfielder.
attacking playmaker. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And plus,
yeah,
he's already had a few years of doing this in a strong Philadelphia Union team under his belt. Shakiris is still learning a lot of this on the fly.
yes, of course.
Yep. So we are hopeful that those players will grow into their roles and can be that help of depth that we do need, whether the Quakes make that move in the transfer window or not. And regarding the transfer window, neither Abram or myself have seen any other rumors regarding San Jose Earthquakes players coming in. Oh, wait, you have?
Yeah, I don't remember his name right now, but there was a Colombian center defensive midfielder that the Quakes apparently inquired after. You guys can go look at that on Twitter. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have any more
Yeah.
information, but that is very interesting. I think that at the best, it would be a replacement for Utzen, who
Mm-hmm.
is, I believe, on the last year of his contract, and I don't think he's shown performances that would uh, really motivate the front office to renew his contract again. So we do need a second string center defensive midfielder. So that could
Mm-hmm.
be what that is.
Right. So there is that. And as soon as you started talking, I immediately remembered that, yeah, I believe also some other MLS teams were in the mix. I believe FC Cincinnati were in the mix. But yeah, that's pretty much all we got right now. But as we do learn more, we will bring them up. But in the meantime, we know we're all San Jose Earthquakes fans. We know that we could speculate all day long. We could spend an hour long speculating players that we'd like to see signed. But ultimately, we know how it goes. But regarding Judson, now that you mentioned him, I do think that the way that this season has gone, it's still competitive, and there's still a lot of potential for success. But because of how tight these games have been, the way things have been going for the Earthquakes, especially recently, it hasn't really been conducive for a center defensive midfielder coming off a lengthy injury to be able to reintegrate himself into the squad. And also on top of that, Carlos Grezzo has been very strong in his performances as well. So just been a combination of factors. Utson's always been a very solid, quality, consistent player for us. But as seasons come and go, the squad changes, needs changes. Sometimes even a good player like Judson just kind of is the odd man out looking in. So that's how it goes in that situation. Things got a little bit more chaotic in this game in the last, let's say, 10-ish minutes or so. Started with Ustani Budik coming on for Carlos Grezzo. So obviously that was Lucha Gonzalez saying that I am going to be aggressive. We're going to look for at least a point. So we applaud Lucha Gonzalez for taking that risk. At this point, it does us no good to lose a game. We gotta get at least a point, so definitely applaud him for that. Um, And then, of course, Christian Espinoza scored an incredible goal. So more on that, Abram.
Yeah, on the goal, it was so Jackson Newell is someone I want to talk about a little bit right before we go into that.
Mm-hmm.
He's been someone who has stepped up his game in a very positive way from the start of the season. He's had dips, but he's been a completely different player from the beginning of last season, where he was a center back. Um, this season, he's been like a crucial part of our team, and we're gonna miss him the next game, no matter what. And then he's also gonna get called up to the national team. But he received the ball, and you can see on his face the expression when he notices who that is over there in space, and he passes it like he kind of panics and passes it over to Espinosa, and Christian turns, and there's no doubt in my mind at this point that he's gonna shoot, and is gonna, it's gonna go either. You know how he hits it. It's either gonna go on target and challenge a keeper, or it's gonna go 100 feet into the stands. But luckily, this one he got it, on frame. It managed to hit off of one of the defenders and trickle its way into the back of the net with great speed. And thank God for that, because it did save us a point at Stanford.
Yep. At least it looked like it would, and eventually it did. And then things got a little hairy when Jonathan Mensah was called for a penalty initially, and then the referee went to VAR to review it, and he decided to revoke the penalty, which is something that's very rare. Try as players might to argue with referees whenever a penalty is given. 99% of the time, once it's given, it's given. That's just how it goes. But they ultimately, obviously, were biased, made the right decision, but because it felt very soft. It was a 50-50 challenge, get the ball. Definitely shouldn't have been a penalty. Of course, I did see Greg Vanny talk at the post-game press conference. He would definitely disagree. Um, but what were your thoughts on all that?
I mean, uh, Jonathan Mensah has had a really hard time reintegrating into this team since his timeout. We still don't know what he did, but I hear that it wasn't something huge. But regardless, ever since he's been back, he's been getting these really rough calls. He caused a penalty, but the foul was like outside of the box the other week,
Yeah.
which was ridiculous. And then again on Saturday against the LA Galaxy. For me, the contact happens before on the ball before it hits the player, and I think that's clear. The commentator was, they were saying that she thought it might be a penalty, but obviously I disagree.
Hmm.
And the referee who is trained in this stuff also looked back on it, thankfully, and decreed that it was not a penalty. But it's just crazy that these things keep getting called on Mensa. He's had a really bad string of bad luck lately.
Right. I feel like center backs do go through these sorts of things. I feel like it's similar to when a striker goes through a little bit of a goal scoring drought when maybe it's not all penalties. Obviously, that would be very unlucky. But when a center back constantly gets fouls called and picks up yellow cards, occasionally gets that quick yellow card accumulation suspension. But yeah, Mensa, he's every game I've seen him in, he continues to show a lot of leadership and good touches in the box, but then he gets stuck in, and some of those things happen. But ultimately, it should not have been a penalty for all the reasons that we've stated already. And on the topic of that goal scoring drought, Bobasi liked Securus. He probably had at least one chance in that game he would have liked back. But on the other end, a center back that's been flying high, Rodriguez had a big time block that would have been a certain goal by Aguirre on the Galaxy side. And I did get to see Nathan and his family when I was going down on the elevator to get to the press conferences. Had you not been there with his family, I would probably ask him a little bit more about what you thought about the Rodriguez block, because I know he was excited about that. He always gets excited about blocks, but he was with his daughter, so we were just excited to see him with his family and him in good spirits. So overall, that was all well and good there, and then the last big moment of the game was Jackson Newell, which looked like it was just a regular tactical foul. He had a bit of contact, and it was another decision that was being looked at for a yellow or a red. Did you think that it had any chance of being a red card?
I think so. Unfortunately, I've seen games where I've played in where that is called a red because the only reason being so is because it was from behind. If
Mm,
he hits it from the side, that's a yellow because you shouldn't be doing that. I don't really have big thoughts on tactical fouls in general, but when you hit someone from behind, it's always going to be a risk of a red.
I think, yeah,
Um,
that's the key thing.
whatever reason the referee decided to not give Jackson the red card is up to him. But obviously he didn't. So that means that maybe there wasn't enough
Contact.
force. Like
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't enough malicious force. I can't say because from behind a lot of the times, as someone who's been through referee class, they tell you if it's from behind, it's a red. Straight away. But it wasn't this time, and I'm thankful. But you
It
know,
was a risk. It
that's
was
what
a
it is.
risk, and I felt that knowing Jackson Newell and being the captain, like those are usually the types of players to make those risks, and it's usually calculated risks. So I gave him that benefit of the doubt. With tackles from behind, obviously you have to make sure it's perfectly timed. That certainly wasn't a perfectly timed challenge. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been considered for a red at all. It maybe just a yellow for sure. Um, I think the more I've given that thought, the more that was probably the luckier break of the two, even more so than the penalty. And I have grown a little bit more sympathetic to Greg Van New's thoughts at the press conference, being upset about that call because I get it. Yeah, you don't want a player being subject to that kind of foul. Um, I do think that Yule's probably going to think twice before he does that again. Now that that's one incident that's going to be in the referee's mind, and the referees, they do exchange notes with each other. It does get reviewed, but ultimately, I feel like the way it played out is the way it played out. I'm cool with it. Would like to think I would be cool with it if I were a Galaxy fan, or just maybe not a Galaxy fan, just any other fan that's not a Quakes or Galaxy fan. But ultimately, it was a fiery affair. It didn't get onto like iconic moments slash ugly moments or like players fighting or anything. I know some fans like to see that in rivalry games, and here and there it's fine. Who among us doesn't enjoy a little bit of those scraps? But I think it was still an enjoyable, entertaining match without it getting to that level, and it was still, it felt like a legitimate rivalry. And obviously, the headline grabbers is going to be El Trafico. I think that's just a reality that we have to accept as San Jose Earthquakes fans until we can truly assert ourselves as one of the two best teams in California. And regardless of how poor the Galaxy are doing right now, if Galaxy can continue to win El Trafico games against LAFC, then they're going to get more of that attention than we will. That's just how it is. But real G's move in silence like the G in lasagna. So that's fine. They can have the credit. They can have their, it was an entertaining El Trafico for them. They set an MLS record, 82,000 crowd at Rose Bowl. But don't let that number make the 45,000 people that attended Stanford less impressive. That's still three times as much as the usual crowds we get at PayPal Park. So that is still worth noting. It does validate the idea that Quakes will continue to have to schedule those games until we can consistently sell out PayPal Park. In which case, maybe PayPal Park gets a renovation, gets expanded, and then we could have all our games there. We could comfortably seat 25,000, 30,000, and maybe beyond that. But ultimately, this is where we are at. This is the parameters that the San Jose Earthquakes have to work in. And ultimately, in these two special occasion games, going against LAFC and Levi's Stadium, and a draw against LA Galaxy, the Quakes are showing up for these big games. I feel like the spark is there. Now the big job is going to be replicating that spark against every other team in Major League Soccer, right?
No, yeah, sorry, I was muted and it wasn't unmuting. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, and on the stadium, I don't know how they would plan to do so. If I had if I had it in Sims and I could build it myself, I have a few ideas of what I would do. But, no, yeah, I agree, and it's an unfortunate truth, but I think it's a truth that most of us have accepted that these teams have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money. We don't spend a lot of money, at least.
Right.
So uh, but we're on our way. We ended in 14th place last season, I believe. We're in sixth
Yeah.
place now. We can only go up, right?
Yeah. And to put in perspective, I can't think of a sport where the Bay Area team is considered the bigger team in like the casual league wide perspective, with the exception of the NFL. And that was helped for the fact that we went 20 some odd years without any football teams in Los Angeles. So, of course, the 49ers have that bit of a head start. In baseball, as good as the Giants are, the Dodgers are still considered the better team and have the better payroll. In the NBA, the Warriors have done very well, but the Lakers are in that conversation with the Celtics with the most titles. And then in hockey, of course, the Sharks are looking at a long rebuild, and the Kings made the playoffs last season. So that's how it is across the board for the most part. In MLS, it's no different. But who knows? Ultimately, San Jose Earthquakes, like several other teams that aren't LA, Seattle, New York, Miami, Orlando, they have to work out different ways. And the prime example of those teams that have constructed great rosters without making the big signings, you look at Philadelphia Union, you look at FC Cincinnati, you look at St. Louis. Cincinnati, for example, their biggest name player is not Brenner or Brandon Vasquez. For most casual fans, the first name people are going to recognize is Colombian international former Atletico Madrid player Santiago Arias. That's not really a flashy, signing compared to, a David Beckham, Zlatan, a Messi. So that's just how it goes here. But regarding the MVP of this game, I think that overall, I hate to say it, but Galaxy player would be the MVP. You look at the two assists, Douglas Costa. And Douglas Costa was the player that LA Galaxy provided to speak to the media during the press conference. He answered his questions in Spanish, which was pretty interesting. Of course, he's Brazilian, so I was expecting Portuguese, but he can speak Spanish very well too. And he was in good spirits. He had a tough start to life at LA Galaxy, dealt with some injuries, and of course, all the other injuries around him right now, with Javier Hernandez and Martin Cáceres sidelined long term, and Ricky Puig still being very relatively young compared to Douglas Costa. He is the de facto leader now. And he may not be the vocal leader, but he expressed that he wants to be that leader in his own way. His actions speak louder than words, and being able to inspire players through his performances. Your thoughts on Douglas Costa's performance, Abram?
Um, so for me, I thought that Douglas Costa was really good. You could see the experience from playing with Bayern and Juventus and all the teams they did play for. But I'll have to disagree with you and say that Puig, for me,
Puig.
was the better player on the day, and actually has been. I didn't see the full game against LAFC, but I'm hearing
He was the
shouts of
MVP
best
of that
player of the
game
league.
for sure.
Right, and he's such an annoying player. I hate when we have to play Puig. I think that him, if a team had him and Almada on the same team, they would be in Europe.
They would, yeah.
It's insane, and he had such an impact on this game. Him and Costa both, when they were receiving the ball, usually it's 50-50. If I think we can win it back. When they received the ball, I was like, okay, we have to wait for them to give it up to someone else before we can win it back, because they're just so good at controlling the ball, and they know, you know, what the defender is going to do, and they have such there's just like a different quality. Of course, coming from big European teams, but
Yeah,
yeah, I agree that Acosta was a very dangerous player and a really frustrating player to play against.
right. So I believe that this could have been what it looked like if, say, they had Beckham and Gerrard at the same time. Two very quality possession-based midfielders. Because when you think about past iterations of the Galaxy, Donovan and Robbie Keane, they aren't necessarily dribbling the ball like Ricky Puig can. I struggle with that pronunciation. Sorry,
Right.
but you get the idea. And with Ricky, he is the type of player that some people think, oh, because he's Spanish and he's technically gifted, that in MLS he's like a luxury player. Like he's not going to try hard every play. But no, he's putting in the work. This is what was very apparent in El Tráfico, was very apparent in this game against the San Jose Earthquakes, is that he will do that box-to-box stuff as well. As for the Quakes MVP, my nod goes to Christian Espinoza, simply because he is, our most important player, our metronome that determines, like, if he plays well, we have a chance to win. If he doesn't play well, our chance to win significantly drops off. A lot of other players like Rodriguez, Costa Capo, Jackson Ewell deserve nods. Daniel's always in the conversation. What are your thoughts for the Quakes MVP?
When you ask me these MVP questions, I always think about who I think impacted the game most, and that doesn't necessarily include who scored, unless they scored like 5 goals or something. Then
Obviously, yeah.
obviously they get MVP. But for me, somebody who was always on the ball for us, winning it back, and making progressive plays was Miguel Chaco.
Yeah.
He's like such a smart player. I was talking about how Puig and Costa, they've played in the top European leagues and have this culture and like experience about them. Charco has that, just not the
Hmm.
athletic ability, and he was like a maestro, but like, and he was coming inside and playing as more of a six alongside Grezzo, and he just impacts the game in a way that I really like watching. Um, Espinosa obviously always makes an impact on the score more than anything else. He's a very high octane, balls to the wall. I don't know if I could say that on this podcast, but he's just like super intense up high on the field. But in terms of like overall impact and progression play and all that, I would maybe go with Miguel Chaco.
Right. Honestly, picking the MVP used to be a lot easier because the Quakes weren't as good before, so there usually only be one or two players to pick out. But the fact that I listed 4 or 5 players and I still, I should have listed Miguel Trauco as well as another option, it goes to show that the results haven't been there lately, but they have been there at times this season, and there's a lot of quality players that can build around. So regardless of how things finish up for the Quakes this season, we still got a lot of soccer to go. If we finish sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, something like that, I do feel like there's a lot of building blocks that if you were to build a team capable of going to an MLS Cup, maybe winning it, that there's still some players that you could see in a team that gets that far.
No, for sure. I mean, we brought in a lot of good signings. Chris Leach has done an amazing
Mhm.
job. I remember last year, sometimes it was like we just hope Chofi scores a banger from outside of the box, which he loved to do. He scored 12 goals that season, and
Hmm.
everyone else was just trying to hold on for dear life, and hopefully they'll get selected again next week. But no, this team is much stronger. And I mean it shows on the scoreboard and it shows on the leaderboard. Sorry, um, and I keep saying this. I'm super thankful for how much improvement we've done, but it's starting to show that we don't have enough uh,
Yeah,
quality in this team.
still
We
work in
don't have enough
progress, and you
depth.
still build a team. Yes, and you keep looking at examples like in Europe, for example. There's a lot of great teams in Europe, but every season those best teams still have to make new signings to continue to reload as players, fall out of favor, fall out of form, or just pursue other opportunities. And granted, trying to build a team in San Jose Earthquakes where it's very much a transitory destination. Players, don't often spend their whole careers there unless they're named Chris Wondolowski and Shea Salinas. Whereas, teams like, Manchester City and Bayern Munich, they can pick and choose whoever they want. So that's not a luxury that we have here. Regarding Christian Espinoza, it was a good week for him. He got MLS Team of the Week. And whether or not he's still an MVP candidate, I'm not entirely sure. I like to think that he can, but just looking at the numbers, if you want to make this a goals and assists combined race, so Christian Espinoza currently stands at 9 goals and 6 assists. So that puts him in the conversation with some heavy hitters for sure, the other MVP candidates. But Hani Mukhtar has 13 goals and 8 assists for 21 combined. Yago Almada has 18 combined. Daniel Gazdag and Carlos Gil have 16 each combined. And Christian Espinoza is tied with Lucho Acosta at FC Cincinnati with 15. And interestingly enough, they both have 9 goals and 6 assists. So I'm not saying cross his name out with red ink, but I'm also not saying write his name in Sharpie on the Landon Donovan MVP trophy, right, Abram?
Right. No, and Espinosa has been incredible this year. Uh, he would have to pick it up in a Ballon d'Or worthy way, of in terms of goals and assists and stuff like that. We're in a league now that has uh, great quality in players like Thiago Almada, Hani Mukhtar. Players like that are always going to be at the top of that leaderboard, and the fact that Espinosa is doing it with a team that isn't as stacked as like Nashville or Atlanta, um, it shows a lot. I think that if we were to get another forward and who kind of complimented them a lot, and they ended up going on a run of like assisting each other and scoring a bunch of goals, then that would be the only thing I think that could save his campaign for MVP. But right now, I don't see it. I don't think it's not very likely.
And looking at the Eastern Conference, which is something we don't often do because, of course, we play most of the teams in the Western Conference, but this is a league-wide MVP award. So from first to seventh in the Eastern Conference, I can name at least one player who can either be an MVP candidate or I just listed based on their goals and assists and are definitely in that conversation. First place Cincinnati, Lucho Acosta. Second place Nashville, Hani Mukhtar. Third place New England, Carlos Gil. Fourth place Columbus Crew, Lucas Zelarayan. Fifth place Union, Daniel Gazdag. Sixth place Orlando, Facundo Torres. Shout out Fabi, he loves his Uruguayans. And then seventh place Atlanta United, Thiago Almada. Seventh place in East, Atlanta sits at 32 points. That puts them on level points with second in the West. So, you know, the East is a bit more top heavy. Of course, there's a few not so great teams there this season. Toronto and Miami are both south of 20 points. But then you also look at the West, and there's two teams there that are south of 20 points, Galaxy and Colorado Rapids as well. So it's not necessarily like, easier schedule, but they've just been putting on a bit more points than the average team in the Western Conference. So as much as we want Christian Espinoza to win some hardware, whether or not he does, he's not the type of player based on, when I talked to him in the press conference at Levi's, that he cares about individual accolades. And even then, he can already check off, most assists in San Jose Earthquakes history. I'm sure he's more than satisfied with that. And he's been in conversation with Shea Salinas, and he's been congratulated, and it's been a brotherhood there. So Espinoza's fine. Like, he just wants to be helping the team any way he can, and his help is definitely necessary for the San Jose Earthquakes to contribute and to be a force in this league. As for the League's Cup, though, so we are starting to move into that territory a bit. The last MLS games we have prior to that will be this Saturday, July 8th, away to LAFC, and then Wednesday is when we host the Sounders Then we have 10 days off before Saturday, July 22nd. Quakes go to Providence Park. They take on Portland Timbers. Then the Wednesday after that is Timbers versus Tigres. So we get an 8-day break in between our games in the group stage. Then we host Tigres at PayPal Park. I know that's going to be an exciting game. Tickets are still relatively cheap. I saw some tickets going for like $42 right now for Tigres Quakes at the time of this recording. But for me, the most important game is going to be at Providence Park, Portland versus San Jose. I think they're more evenly matched, and Tigres just won the 2023 Clausura title in Liga MX. So Tigres, on paper and in actuality, are the strongest team in that group. And with 2-3 advance, you just need to beat one other team, and you're through most likely. So we got focusing on that game. How are you looking forward to this Leagues Cup with Portland and Tigres?
Um, yes, I'm happy to see the Quakes competing in a competition. I don't know if they should be putting much focus into it. You know, as we're a team chasing the playoffs, so I don't know if a deep cup run, especially with the depth that we lack. But I obviously want us to win every game, so I will be watching, and yeah, I hope it goes well.
And this league is much about as reputation as it is about results. And and they're kind of hand in hand. If you beat a team from Mexico as an MLS team for the longest time, Liga MX is seen as a superior league. That's kind of been blurry a little bit, although by the most important standard, Liga MX won the CONCACAF Champions League this past season. So we're back in that situation. We would like a little bit more of a break, but at the same time, we don't want too big a break either. So if we do crash out in the group, that means we're done in July 30th, and then our next MLS game is about 3 weeks after that, where we go to Vancouver. So I think that it would be helpful if we at least get out of the group, and then whatever happens, happens. But of course, whichever teams do make it the furthest, they're looking at likely a 3-day break before going back to MLS. But ultimately, you're in a competition. Every team's goal is to advance as far as they can and to do well. And this is an important test, even if it's not for MLS points at stake, to showcase where San Jose Earthquake can measure up against right now the best team in Mexico and obviously a solid team in Portland as well. We'll talk a little bit about Gold Cup before we circle back with our closing thoughts on LAFC and Sounders. So, unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that there was a terrible incident at Levi Stadium when Mexico played Qatar. There was a stabbing that occurred. It was just horrendous, tragic. I don't recall seeing any confirmation if the victim is alive or not. I just saw, unfortunately, I did see the video, and I don't feel comfortable going into too much detail about it, but I'm sure you're all aware. It just didn't feel right for us to continue talking about the Gold Cup without acknowledging that, especially since it did happen in our local stadium for the Gold Cup. Abram, any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's good that we got the culprit on camera. We do have visual confirmation of who it is. I hope that they're caught, and I these things really upset me because of the fact that they paint a negative picture of certain minorities in this
Mm-hmm.
country, and
Yeah.
it kind of confirms a lot of biases, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, especially, there's a lot of good things that happen on the 4th of July, but some of the bad things, of course, is that some people use 4th of July as an excuse to spread their problematic rhetoric, whether it be flying Confederate flags, whether it be to shout racist things at Walmart saying, go back to your country, speak English, or like you're criminals, you're all bad, whatever. Like all this bullshit is ridiculous. And fortunately, there are some bad actors that will cause people to think those problematic thoughts. Obviously, we hope that people won't draw those conclusions. We just hope that the people that were responsible for that event don't set foot in a soccer game ever again. I think that if you do something like that, you revoke your right to enjoy that, because that should be reserved for families, for friends, for people to enjoy themselves and return home safely. Um, Moving on with other Gold Cup matters that are far less important but are relevant to soccer. We do know the 8 teams that are going to the quarterfinals, and we have the matchups: Guatemala versus Jamaica. Abram, what's your prediction?
Guatemala versus Jamaica. So shout out to Pablo. Pablo is my only Guatemalan friend. You don't see many of them out here. At least I don't. Um, uh, Jamaica is stacked. They
Yeah,
have a very good team, and they've been performing relatively well. I think that although Guatemala did well in the last game, Jamaica has too much quality, and they're going to end up winning.
right. I think what we learned in the group stage is that the two best teams in the tournament, they happen to be in the same group, and occasionally that happens. So just because Jamaica is a group runner up, they played as well as you can while still being a group runner up. So I think Jamaica takes this one. Next up, we have Mexico versus Costa Rica. It's been up and down for Mexico. They had first 2 games that were really good, and then I don't know what happened against Qatar. They lose to Qatar, and then they still managed to win the group. And because they faced Costa Rica, and Costa Rica haven't looked that good, I'm gonna go first this time. I'll say Mexico advances. Abram?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was just like listening to what you're saying, and I totally agree. I forgot I was part of the show for a second. I was just listening. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
And then this is going to be the biggest matchup of the quarterfinals: USA versus Canada. Abram, who do you think goes through?
USA versus Canada is a very tough one. I think USA would love to say, that we have the quality. We've gotten to a point where we should be winning these every single time. But Canada has been like disruptors. They're like changing the status quo. So it's pretty. It's more
Close.
even than a lot of people might
Yeah.
think. But for the sake of Cade Cowell and all the other players on that
And
team,
Jackson
I
Newell
I
now.
think Jackson Newell as well. I think that the USA do have slightly more quality, so they can pull out a victory if they play well.
Right. I think while Canada's still a formidable opponent, the absence of Davies and David is hurting them. I think that the fact that they conceded 2 against Cuba in their final group game shows that there's some defensive frailties. I think USA will find a way to win this game. As for Kate Cowell and now Jackson Ewell being in the picture, Kate Cowell recovered from an okay game against St. Kitts and Nevis, had a much better game against Trinidad and Tobago, got his first U.S. men's national team goal, set up an assist. So I think that'll definitely warrant Cade Cowell being a feature off the bench, regardless of the situation, whether they're down a goal or up a goal. As for Jackson Newell, the fact that he is an injury replacement for Alan Senora leads me to believe that he may or may not play. I think it'll take him some time, so it's very important that for his involvement, that the USA do get past Canada, and then maybe Jackson Newell sees a bit more action in the semifinals and beyond. But ultimately, it's always nice to see one San Jose Earthquakes player representing the United States. And when you get to see two, that's definitely something we get to enjoy. Even if U.S. men's national team Twitter is not really happy about one of them, that's okay. They can think what they want. Next up for the final quarterfinal, Panama versus Qatar. I'm thinking Panama showed some nerves of steel in their final group match against El Salvador. They rotated heavily and still were able to look like the better team. So, at least relative to most other teams in this tournament, Panama do have the depth and quality to compete against them. So now that they're back to full strength, of course, since it's the knockout stage, and I feel like Qatar, they used up all their magic to beat Mexico. I think Panama take them out.
Yep, I hope so for beating Mexico. I hope that Panama can exact revenge.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't really harbor too much of a vendetta for Qatar being Mexico. I just think that Mexico need to get their act together, and I think they will in this quarterfinal. Get on Qatar, like they didn't really do too much of the World Cup. You managed to beat one of the better teams in CONCACAF, even though you're not supposed to be here. I mean, okay, you made it worth it for yourselves. As for my power rankings, if I were to rank like the 8 teams from worst to best, I think Costa Rica, I've been least impressed by them. I put them at 8. Guatemala, I put them at 7. Yeah, they won their group, but I do still think that Canada's slightly better than them, so I put them at 6. I'll give Qatar credit. They did beat Mexico, and they do have a lot of experience from the World Cup, which not a lot of teams in CONCACAF obviously do. So Qatar, I'll put them in 5. Then that leaves Panama in 4, Mexico in third, which is something I probably wouldn't have expected at this point based on their Nations League performances, but they're starting to play a little bit better. I'll have USA at 2, and I'll have Jamaica at 1. And the reason for that is because in the game that Jamaica and USA played against each other, Jamaica did outplay them. And if it weren't for Matt Turner saving Leon Bailey's penalty, Jamaica probably wins that game and wins the group. So right now, Jamaica are the team to beat. USA right now have gotten away with it so far with their B roster, but they need to be careful. And who knows? Maybe Jamaica ends up winning this Gold Cup, or even Mexico. They might start sending stronger teams again in the Gold Cup because I do think that they can manage what Mexico is doing. They may not have all their players at their disposal, but they still have a very strong team. So, any team that you might put higher or lower, Abram?
No, I think um, I'm- I just sorry. So the Mexico thing is so weird to say nowadays. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's Mexico was supposed to be a giant of Concacaf, and it's really sad to see how they're doing. And unfortunately, a lot of it seems to be self inflicted. Um, and hopefully, like you said, we need to get our act together because it's
right.
not funny anymore. It's not fun. Um,
Right, and it's not to say that Mexico can't be the fourth best team in CONCACAF and still be a good team, because USA and Canada do have the potential to be good soccer teams, and Jamaica, while being a smaller country, they do have the resources to recruit dual nationals from the English league system, so they can start to get stronger as well. But Mexico are not getting stronger. I feel like they've stagnated, and we'll see if there's enough gems in this group to reverse that stagnation into progress again. And San Jose Earthquakes as well are at risk of stagnation as well, and LAFC and Sounders are posing daunting tasks. Who are some of the danger players that you think the Quakes need to look out for the most in those 2 games?
uh, so, a quick question: will Jordan Morris be there?
Hmm, that's a good question. Let me quickly look up the 2023 CONCACAF Gold Cup schedule, because of
Right.
course that is dependent on how far the USA go. The Gold Cup extends to the final on July 16th. So if it's dependent on if the USA win or lose against Canada. If the USA lose to Canada, then Jordan Morris could potentially be back for Sounders game, as well as Christian Roldan, which is not
Yeah.
really, lighting up the radar in the national team, but he's still a very important player for the Sounders. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a few. I think in the LAFC game, we struggle against players that can dribble and kind of have really good control of the ball. So I think Vela, the a player that we should look out for. He almost got through a few times at Levi's, but we managed to really compact zone 14 and didn't give him any space to shoot off of his left foot. Denny Bouanga got lucky on his goal at Levi's, but if we give him those chances, he will take those chances.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Seattle, same thing. I think that they are a very strong system team, and they create chances in and around the box. And if we let them, they will. Like Nico Ladero is a player that has been a real threat to the Earthquakes for as long as he's been in this league. Um, So I just worry about like not just what he can do, uh, but the players making runs off of him, and if they can exploit the space, we've been leaving too much space, and I think that if they can find the weaknesses that we have, which are pretty glaring, it's going to be dangerous. I'm nervous about these two next games.
Yeah. As for LAFC, if I have to pick out one player, I'm looking at Diego Palacios because he missed the LA Galaxy game due to yellow card accumulation, so he's going to be fresh, and he is very important for how they're set up defensively as well as how they begin their attack. So that's going to be a very interesting battle there. Perhaps he's usually a left back, so he might line up against Carlos Capo, right back. As for the Sounders, I'm going to be interested in the striker situation because Raul Ruiz Diaz is not really lighting up the radar in MLS this season. He's still a very talented player, and he missed a game recently for personal reasons, but he's back. Heber was his replacement during that time, but I feel like he's always very dangerous. And I think that, Roldan and Jordan Morris, as much as, U.S. men's national team fans are apathetic about them, I think that they're still very dangerous against MLS caliber opposition. And of course, of the goalkeepers, you can't sleep on McCarthy for LAFC, but of course Stephen Fry, he is former Del Salle alumni, so he's from the Bay Area, and he is very tough to beat whenever he plays the San Jose Earthquakes. As for the keys to beating LAFC and Seattle, my keys for beating LAFC is to put pressure on their back line, which is not very deep right now. They're missing a lot of players due to injuries, so you have to be aggressive against them. And as for the Sounders, I think we could be a little bit more methodical in our approach. Not saying invite pressure like last time because it's not a sustainable way to win games, but I think that especially since we're coming off of that, game on Saturday, so we won't be as fully fit for the Sounders game as the LAFC game. That's the game for LAFC. You go full throttle and you go more aggressive. And then against the Sounders, you're more methodical in your approach and you have to take more advantage of set piece situations and being more accurate with those entry passes in the final third. What are your thoughts, Abram?
No, I think that in terms of play style, I think you're 100% correct. Um, we definitely don't want to give Seattle the ball again and just like hunker down. I think if we can win the ball like a little bit higher up the field from the defensive point of view, if we don't move back into our box and invite space, if we can stop their play higher up and then go right at them immediately, I think that'll be the thing that gives us the most chance, and I think we're capable of doing so because we have really good personnel, but we have to turn our defensive performances around before we can, pull something like that off.
The main thing I'm going to be looking forward to defensively is just minimize the mistakes because you're up against two titans of MLS. So you're going to get punished 9 times out of 10 from competent MLS teams when you make mistakes. You're going to get punished 99 times out of 100 against these two, against veteran players like Carlos Vela and Nico Ladero, those players. Um, and my keys to game offensively is just to maintain that confidence. And it's not apples to apples, but since I play basketball and I've watched basketball more intensely, even longer than I've watched soccer, the best analogy I can use is that when you miss shots, that you still take those same shots. I don't want to see this team get timid and you know start to question what's been working for them just because it's not going the ball in the back of the net. Thinking of players like Nico Ladero, thinking of players like Jeremy Abobasi that have had some misses that I still believe in them. I think that they can still do well. So that's what I'm going to be looking for in those games. Any closing thoughts for those upcoming games?
Uh, so one player that we didn't mention this whole podcast, but who I thought turned his form around in the last game was Benji Kikanovic. I thought that we haven't seen Benji this season, but against LA Galaxy, for whatever reason, he was there. I saw definitely, glimpses of that man that we all miss.
Yeah, he's a
And
Bay
he
Area
almost
or NorCal guy, so I think that might have been the right game to reinvigorate him.
that's a good point. But he almost got us back in the game with that cross to Espinosa,
Uh huh.
but it was a little bit too heavy, and I think, don't quote me on this, but you guys can look it up. I think that Benji has a 0% cross accuracy with the Earthquakes. He doesn't cross very well, but he scores, on whether he's a winger or a forward.
That tells
So
me he's adapting his game.
yeah, so well, he's trying to.
Yeah, he's trying to.
He still hasn't gotten that cross off. But once he does, he found Abobasi in a really dangerous spot back post. That's a really good eye to spot that. And I think that if Benji is in fact back, it'll show against LAFC and Seattle.
Right. The last thing I can think of before we do our final closing is, like I said, it was a very big weekend of soccer in the Bay Area. And week, if you want to go as far back as a week ago when Oakland Roots were closing off a 3-game homestand, it was disappointing to lose 2-0 to Rio Grande Valley. But Oakland Roots have been phenomenal to watch this season. The fans have been very supportive, as well as the Oakland Soul as well. The Oakland Soul sold out all of their regular season games. They qualify for the postseason. They'll take on SF Glens, who they beat to qualify for the postseason again on Friday, this time with playoff implications. They'll be in Skyline College. I'm going to try to go to that game, and I encourage you all to go. This will be up by then. Hopefully, you'll see that. If not, I'll definitely be telling y'all on our Discord server to go to that game if you can. And of course, Quakes 2 as well, Abram, and they did succeed in beating the Galaxy. So, report on that.
Um, I was not able to make that game.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch. But obviously, we love beating Galaxy.
mm-hmm.
I believe it was another game where we had to go to penalties,
Mm-hmm.
which for anyone who hasn't seen, if a game in MLS Next Pro ends in a tie after 90 minutes and stoppage time, we go to straight to penalties.
Yeah,
No extra time, just straight to penalties, and whoever wins that gets an additional point on top of the 1 point from the tie. So Quakes went away with 2 points from that game. We keep winning on these penalties, and I'm not going to complain about it. I think that we have good penalty takers, especially Lalo Blancas, who is, he scored the very first goal in Quakes 2 history off of a penalty. So if we have to keep doing that and keep winning on penalties, then I'm fine with that. But
right.
yeah,
And hey, I'd rather them learn how to take penalties in MLS Next Pro than having to take it perhaps for the first time in their career in a U.S. Open Cup game next season. So I think that's another asset to have. And the point of that format for young players in development, I think that's perfect for that age because you don't want to run those kids to the ground. You want them to develop and have more opportunities to develop their skills. So I think that for that it's fine. And whether or not extra time has a place in the future of soccer, that's been up for debate in general. But definitely for the youth levels, I'm fine with minimizing extra time whenever possible. That'll do it for us today. We'd like to thank you all for watching. Our plan for the next podcast, we're going to wait until both games against LAFC and Seattle Sounders have transpired before we reconvene. And we're planning for that podcast to be the introduction of our newest host and editor, Devin. Abram, you had a chance to get to know Devin for the last few weeks and months, so I know this is exciting, right?
yeah, definitely. Devin actually saved the day on the Colin Mills podcast. We were struggling to get that out. We were talking on the phone at like 2 a.m. He was like, "Dude, I got it! It's finally done! It finally rendered." I was like, "Awesome, dude!"
Right.
And I would have given up much earlier than he did. So definitely props to him.
Yes, we're
Um,
so thankful for Devin.
yeah,
Definitely. So our Tectonic Takes family continues to expand. It's had a lot of evolutions in uh, 3 years it's been in existence, and we're happy to have people that care about Quakes, care about the podcast, and care about the community. Devin checks all those boxes, and I know there's many of you that are similar Tectonic Takes quality, and we're happy to have you as part of our community through Discord, through Twitter, and just interacting with you at games as well. Over the last few games, we've had a chance to meet some of you, hang out. It's been so much fun. And thank you for making this season fun, regardless of the results on the pitch. On that note, that'll be it for us today. Have a good one.